of trains a day. Some of them would be small little trains between the little communities in the area. So it could even just be almost like a single train car. So it's not like passenger trains all the time, but we had the Pierre Marquette rail station, the Grand Rapids, Indiana and Grand Rapids train station, hauling passengers here on a constant basis in the summers. In the winters, it changes a little bit. And all those hotels that we had, they kind of get a little empty or they close down. And the community, as we all know, we have to sort of deal with something different. Also, I have to say too, it's hard to imagine. We are about the same latitude as the French Riviera. So I guess I never realized that the winters on the Mediterranean are so harsh. Um, and here's a picture. I think this is down. I'm not always good at this game. There's some people who are fantastic at it, and you guys might see it better. But I think this might be down Petoskey Street, heading towards Lake Street, is my thought. But I could be wrong. It looks like a lot of work, and this we should give credit to the guys in the city who clean this at nights these days, and we just don't see that generally. And all the shop owners who are still 100 years later shoveling. Um, and I mean, this is a picture of my mother's house from a few years ago, and my grandmother's house here in town. So, some things for us haven't changed that much. And as we all know, I mean, being here in the summer is easy. Being here in the winter is a commitment. And we have to figure out things to do. It's hard sometimes. It's hard to get out. We have, thankfully, talks like this. We have, movies and little events, but it's something you really got to work at. And the same was very true 100 years ago. Yeah, 100 years ago. And so in 19, and at this point, I guess I actually want to say one quick thing. So this is what we are used to. This is what we know. And the museum is filled with all this great stuff from the hotels, the trains, the summers. But Jane and I, we had come on as the co-directors at the museum in 2015, I think. We needed to do an exhibit. The previous director was retiring from that position. He's a great guy, Mike Federspiel, and he gave us the greatest gift we could get at the museum. His exhibit designer, Janet Danick, who is super talented. She designs exhibits for State of Michigan History Museum, CMU, and a fantastic person. And she was not going to let us do a bad exhibit. So we had a really high bar to hit. We're like, well, what do we do? And we started to realize we had all these little bits and pieces, and we'd heard about these things about a winter carnival that we used to have. But I didn't know anything about it. This was sort of new to me. We saw some pictures of these ice thrones. I thought it was somewhere else. Like it couldn't have been here. How could it have been here? And so we had to like start digging into the archives, into boxes, and there was a lot of reorganization and that needed to be done at the museum at the time, and a lot's progressed since then. And we're just going through trying to piece together the story of this thing that some of our board members had potentially participated in as children, but I knew nothing about. It was, way before me in many ways. So as we started to dig in, we found records of a winter carnival. So the first winter festival, it's not the winter carnival. There's a difference here, and there's some debate, which is always fun, local history debates. So in 1927, Petoskey hosted a winter festival. So it's inspired by other cities doing such things like Minneapolis, St. Louis, as well as Charlevoix hosted one. There was a parade. This here is a ice sculpture of Abraham Lincoln that lit up, which, with 1920s technology, I'm curious how they had a generator or something, I guess. And it was done by a young artist here, Stanley Kellogg. At the time, he would have been about 18. There are also fun events. Oh, this is more parades. This might not be that exact year, but just to show you kind of stuff they're doing, there's a Petoskey serpent, right up there with the Loch Ness Monster. There's a story about that. And then some fantastic costumes that were made that were not terrifying. But they're really detailed. I'm really impressed. They had events like barrel jumping. So this is at least labeled 1927. So that first winter festival. Barrel jumping, a lot of skating, just to kind of show what would be going on, as well as this is one of my favorites, coasting is what they would call it. So it's a bobsled. So is there a pointer on this? All right, cool. So this is kind of a dark picture. It's a little hard to see, but these are a number of gentlemen lined up on a wooden sled. The museum has one, and I think the city of Petoskey said they just had one in storage too. And it's a little wooden toboggan that can hold about 7, 8 people, and they would send it down Mitchell Street. Yes, and and I think it's critical that the Reverend is the first guy on there because there were a number of injuries and potentially even a fatality, which is tragic. But we would do anything to just kind of keep ourselves entertained in the winter. And this was very popular. There were coasting clubs even. So then in 1928, so this was in the like February of 1927, and then as we got through into the summer of 1927, the city manager, sorry, P.T. Mitchell, hosted a group, as he said, for the purpose of discussing and formulating a program of winter sports for Petoskey and the surrounding territory. This was a success. There are other events like this going on. We have a lot of hotels. We are a resort community in many ways. I'm sure that they saw the opportunity both to, alleviate some boredom as well as, find ways to enliven the tourist industry at the same time. And this is a quote that I think is going to be really key as we go forward with this. So, W.J. McManus, he was so part of the McManus family. They had a mill, and he was the proprietor of the Cushman Hotel. So that would have been along Pennsylvania Park. He said, "There is no reason why Petoskey and the Little Traverse Bay region, with its natural resources, cannot lead in winter sports activities." And he was part of the state of Michigan had a winter sports committee, and he was the president at the time. The state was committing resources to try and get communities to do winter-related activities, as well as to clear roads and things like that. So the Petoskey Winter Sports Club was formed. We actually have the bylaws, which is interesting. And with the idea of creating an event to really capitalize on all this sort of winter activities. But a few other things kind of had to come into play with all of this. What we are used to for 100 years of snow removal was rather novel in 1928. So this snow removal had really kind of only been snow removal's in its infancy at this time. Only about 10 years worth of sort of knowledge and equipment and technique was built to clear out roads. And these roads were also being invested in heavily. In their mid-1920s, a young officer, Dwight D. Eisenhower, was part of a survey group that drove across the continent, with the idea being that we had just ended a massive scale war, and the thought of being, well, man, if there's another one, how prepared are we? And they found that in many places, getting from one end, driving in a vehicle, trains were a bit different, driving from one end of the United States to the other, at times there was no even roads that would connect. So a lot of investment was being made in interstates and highways. At the same time, and I think this is critical in being in Michigan, and I do like numbers and statistics, I think that it's important to have qualitative resources in history, but also quantitative, so we can see, is it true what we're talking about? Auto ownership in 1920 was about 20% of households owned a car. By 1930, so just in 10 years, over 60% of households owned a car. So that number is tripling. That's a diametric shift in habits for citizens. So we needed to clear the roads. And I love it when history can also speak for itself. So these quotes are from the 1937 Petoskey Evening News, as they were doing a 10-year retrospective on the Winter Carnival. And they said, even the efforts of these determined men, the Winter Sports Committee in Petoskey, could not have achieved their goal earlier because until the middle 1920s, northern Michigan was isolated from snowfall until spring. The comparatively new program of snow removal, sponsored by the state, cities, and counties, had to come before the bugaboo of winter could be wiped out in Michigan. Though we might argue that there's still a bit of a bugaboo with it, at least we're not dealing with this. Um, so a lot of things kind of had to come together to make it so that we could actually have something that wasn't just a local event and was more of a regional one. And so with all these things kind of coinciding, uh, Petoskey had its first annual Winter Sports Carnival. Um, this is the program for it. I find it interesting that it was Tuesday and Wednesday. But this was the first one, and the governor of honor is, or the guest of honor, my apologies, is Governor Fred Green. So, started out pretty strong. And we had a packed program. It started off with a parade, followed by the coronation of the Winter Queen. And then throughout the rest of the day, there were ice boat races across the bay, dog sled and horse and cutter races through the downtown, and more of that coasting on Mitchell Street because you can't get enough of that. And I just think that'd be wild to just be in the downtown and seeing horses and dogs, screaming by in races and people, flying down Mitchell Street. It must have been a blast. In the evening, they had, so here's the governor, and this was the first Carnival Queen, Elise Bohm. In the evening, they had, oh, sorry, here's a parade. My apologies. I forgot what slides I put in there, I guess. So this is a later parade. So this is 1928, but it's close, and I just want to be like, that crown looked rather impressive. I was pretty impressed by that. We do have the winter, that is a later piece, but the Winter Queen's cape over there. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm missing a piece. So there were also events like ski jumping. Uh, and there's a lot of ski jumping. Like people are not alpine skiing so much at this time. Like what we're used to is skiing. This is really how they were interacting with it. And this local ski jumping club constantly begs the city to build bigger and bigger ski jumps. And there's also, that's a fox. There was also a fox hunt in town. That's exactly what I thought. Thankfully, I found just randomly, I think a few years after we had done this, I found notes that they used the fox to like lay a trail of scent and then had the dogs run it. So the fox was not harmed as far as they've said in this process. Um, so then there was the winter ball. So this was the big gala and on the first day. $1 was charged for couples to dance on the floor, and then you could pay 25 cents to watch from the balcony. The Petoskey School Gymnasium, the high school gymnasium. So that was torn down. Exactly. Yeah, and here's what it looked like. I just would have loved to have seen that. They would get big bands to play. It was a really big deal, and also a big part of the fundraiser for it. So the event was, and then to cap it off was the college championship hockey game between Michigan State College and Michigan Tech. The problem being, I've looked into this, there is no record in like college sports history of that being a championship. And I found in the meeting notes that they had just found two teams that would come and play a game here in town, and they call that championship. So they knew how to market themselves. Now, also with this, they had to plot this carnival out through all the downtown, and it was a really big success. Everybody's really pleased, but they didn't have a place to really do it. So like the hockey games were played, and the parks were turned into skating rinks, and I think a hockey game was played either there or maybe I can't quite remember where they said it was played, but they had to make use of other assets they had in town to do this. But with the success, they wanted to find a permanent home. So a few years later, they take what they called Swan Park. That is a zoo. You can kind of see there's critters in here and critters over here. So Petoskey had a zoo, and turned it into the Winter Sports Park. So this is the Winter Sports Park. And it's kind of fun. I have this picture in here because it's always interesting to try figure out where things are. And I think that this barn right here is kind of critical in sort of understanding orientations and because like the Winter Sports Park, if this is, I mean, this is it, it's there's no trees, so it's kind of hard to orient yourself sometimes. So the so the Winter Carnival was a great success, and they start to invest into the pageantry of the event. And uh, critical part was the Winter Sports Park that we now all get to enjoy, and we all have our different stories of it as time has gone on. But lots of skaters. Um, this is one of the old warming houses, and you can see, like as I said, I think that's a different outbuilding, but I'm still trying to figure out where that farm is. As well as they used to have a luge run. Now I don't know when they removed this. I feel like I've run into a few people who say they've had memories of it. But also the Winter Sports Park the hill used to be taller, I believe, because it was cut down and a lot of the some part of the Winter Sports Park was cut down, and that dirt and soil was used for the bypass in the 1960s. That then so that the highway didn't go up Mitchell to Division anymore, it just went around the town. Um, Here's where I think that barn is. That's why I said I'm so intrigued by it. Um, and as per most things that sort of disappear, it was all fun until some people got really injured and they tore down the luge run. But it was a hot spot for winter activity. So they started to, as I said, they started to invest more in the pageantry. They started to do sort of bigger projects. And one was the ice thrones. And we have the model of this over in that corner. It's fantastic. This is in 1933, Stanley Kellogg, that young man from the parade, designed and built this winter throne. I mean, and it's massive. When you have people on it, like the Winter Queen standing there will be like right about this tall. So it is 40 feet tall. You have sculpted polar bears, and it's lit up. And just to think of it, this is a 25-year-old kid, really, being like, "Hey, I got an idea." Um, and so then the Winter Carnival also used to host more and more events. They would bring in skiing champions, skating champions. So here, this gentleman's going to defend his skating title. I will also be really clear. I feel like people are really loose with how they got these titles and things like that. Um, but they would probably just do the routes throughout the region and have these competitions. But again, Petoskey's a draw. We're in the middle of nowhere. It's hard to get here, but it's a draw for these people. Also, the time starts to matter. This is 1936. So what started just before the Depression is now, a successful program in the midst of the Depression. I also think it's interesting here. Roosevelt ready to ask for new taxes. Governor Fitzgerald suggests slashing taxes. So it's fun how that never changes too. Um, so the event continues to grow and grow in popularity. The skating pageants become more ornate. They get good quality skaters. Um, so they would have, as I said, they'd have speed skating champions. There's records of ski jump champions. Petoskey even hosted the National Amateur Speed Skating Championship one year. We have an entry form for it, which is really cool because that does look official in lots of different programs, as well as figure skating is a really key part of all of this. Something a lot of kids participate in, and a lot of adults. And so we several times the Detroit Figure Skaters Club would come up here to participate, and this is one of the Detroit figure skaters. And Detroit at the time was a mecca for figure skating. A lot of Olympic champions or Olympic contenders would train there in the 20s and 30s and then go compete elsewhere. So we were drawing, it's started to be more than just a local event. And to that, this this is the History Museum now. So this is a Pierre Marquette train station in winter. where usually our other winter pictures of it is desolate and empty, even at the time. These are what they would call the snow trains. This is from the Grand Rapids Herald, I believe, advertising a snow train to Petoskey. It leaves at 7:30 a.m., comes back at 11:30 p.m. 275 for tickets, so about 50 bucks. And it'd bring up hundreds of visitors per day to Petoskey. And so many people were coming that residents would open their houses to these visitors. So it had quite the draw, and I just love the art here, that 30s art. So, oh, oh no, he was. I mean, this is just a lot of. We actually have records of the amount of investment the committee was actually putting into getting publicity out there. So there's even some financial records of they were making deals with the was it the Associated Press at the time? So like some of like the bigger newspapers in the area to publicize it, as well as film reels. So there's quite a bit of advertising, and I don't think that was Stanley, because he was busy designing another ice run that I'll show you in a few moments. So this is just one of my favorite pictures. So this is kind of a little bit examination of some of the sports, what these sports look like. I love it. The use of these facilities in this park is solely at the user's risk. The city of Petoskey assumes no risk in the case of accident or injury. So I just like your smile. So here's one thing. This is Winter Sports Park. And this is maybe, could also call this section a little bit of, did they make it? I am, no. This is a little concerning, but there's a really good story to this, finding out that he did make it. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But this is Walter Zarem, 1936 or 38, or I think it's 34. I think it's clipped. And he's one of the Detroit speed skaters. So he's from that skating club, the Zarems. Here we even have so here's a little video. So this is Skijoring. I think this is on Little Traverse Bay. Um, and we're always inventive. And here's this one, just looks murderous. A, a ski boat with an airplane engine on it, and not really any good safety precautions there. I also should note, as I said, I like data and information. Men are 4 times more likely to die from accident than women. I think you can kind of see why. So again, ski jumping was really popular. And so here's some of the footage from. Hmm. Oh, getting slow-mo. And I just like that at least. So the at the museum, my partner Jane and I, we found just all these like reels of film sitting around. We had no clue what was on them. So we took them to a local videographer, and he was able to digitize these for us. And it was just exciting to see. And two, we were kind of worried because like I think it's silver nitrate in those old film reels. So it's like it's really cool. You want to preserve it, but also it's flammable in a wooden structure built in 1890, filled with paper. It just when I was working there, I was also working at the grain train. And so I would look out the windows every once in a while just to make sure I wasn't seeing smoke coming up from the museum. I was just always worried about it. So we had that digitized, and we were just sort of shocked to see all of this footage from the Winter Carnival. Hence, too, as I said, the committee had invested in having videographers come to turn these into newsreels. As well as I mean, rather ubiquitous Northern Michigan sport, bump jumping. I've actually never used one. Have any of you guys gone bump jumping? Okay, well, one person half-heartedly raised their hand, I think. Your kids. Um, as a local historian, I will also say one thing. I do not want to get into the fight of figuring out who invented it. Every town in the area says that they did. Boyne City, Petoskey, East Jordan, Charlevoix, Gaylord, Sheboygan. And I can find references to it going back through so many of our older newspapers that I really wouldn't know how to find the answer. But we all have the same need for doing silly things in the winter. Um, so I do want to spend a moment here and to talk about some of the people that were involved. So we had like the city planners, city like business people. They were wanting to get something going on, but these are some of the people who actually made it something incredible. So Stanley Kellogg, born in 1908, I believe, graduated from Petoskey High School, and his art teacher was Frances Palethorpe, somebody who you'll see throughout the history museums. Archives. She was important in preserving a lot of history. Her father was also the judge, so she has a very interesting story herself. And she was an art teacher. My grandfather was a contemporary of Stanley Kellogg's, and he spoke very well of Mrs. Palethorpe as well, Miss Palethorpe. So she was a very encouraging art teacher. So the value of teachers. I know there's several of you in the audience. Um, so he's a young man. He opens his pottery studio. It's what is Fletch's, um, and produces a lot of pottery. He has a number of people who are his apprentices who also sort of learn the arts and the trades through him. And over here too, you'll see that's video footage of him building one of the ice thrones in 1935, and that's provided by his family. So they have a great art record of his work as well. But he's about 25 at the time that he builds this. And you can actually see him wearing this cap over in that video footage. We were curious who the woman was, and his daughter came by and said, "Oh, that was his like cousin or something." So um, it was not his wife. And so he built several ice thrones. So the one we have the model of, this one's built in 1935. Again, you always got to be careful with how people claim, but the Queen's Throne of Ice in 1935, greatest piece of solid ice sculpture in the world. But it was 120 feet long, 60 feet deep, and 60 feet tall. It was massive. Um, Something that really helps, and again, we have this in the records. One thing that makes this possible is it's the Great Depression. So there are work programs. Stanley designed this and certainly works on it, but he needs dozens of workers to help him out. Again, you can see that right in that fantastic footage over there. And these workers were funded by the WPA and the CCC, so those New Deal era programs to keep people employed. I don't know if this would have happened without it. So it's just interesting how, you know, those moments in history intersect. Also, it was lighted. So again, he seemed to like really putting light, electricity and water together. So it's illuminated with colored lights. You can actually see them in that footage, sort of stringing the lamps along inside of it. I would just have loved to see it. It's just a wonderful Art Deco piece. Um, and then, okay, so actually, I'm not certain. That's a really good question. When I watched it, I assumed so, but when I started to watch this video footage, and I don't know if the whole thing is here. I've watched it previously. This might just be an excerpt from it. What they do is you see these blocks, large blocks sliding down into the winter sports park. Now, how it's set up, I would have thought they would have just trucked the ice in. It was coming from the bay, and I have wondered if they were cutting it out of the smaller inland lakes that would have maybe frozen deeper and faster versus out of the bay. So I don't know, but it's a really interesting thing, and that's how we have to try and piece it together. Um, yeah, sure. I meant more so trucked in then from the like brought up to the docks probably than trucked in versus it is terrifying. There are giant chunks of ice that are just going down a zip line that again people were just either tougher or had less OSHA rules. Now this person is probably one of the most important people to me in the history museum. I've never met her. She passed away before I worked at the museum. I did get to meet her daughter, which was fantastic. Mabel Johansson, a young woman. I think she graduates in about 1933, and she's a really avid skater. I'm really into the pageantry of it. And we even have her dress right over here. So that you can see and along with Bozo. So Mabel is passionate about skating. She's reaching out to the Detroit skaters. She's reaching out to the I think I have it here. Yeah. So she's a member of the Petoskey Figure Skating Club, the Winter Sports Club. We have these cards, as well as she got a complimentary ticket to the Charlevoix Gymnasium's Winter Queens Ball. So I've been curious why it was at the Charlevoix Gymnasium. We have letters from her to the Zarems, these Detroit skaters, who I'll have another story about in a moment, as well as she's part of this Bozo the Skating Mule. So my Jane and I, we were going through our archives and just trying to figure out what we have. And one day we came across just this donkey head in a box. And we're like, oh my God, what is this? I just didn't know. Like now it's so easy. It's like, oh yeah, it's Bozo. And we have these pictures of it. These were two men in a skating costume, and then another gentleman who would be kind of the ringmaster on these tall skates. And then Mabel is sitting on the back of a guy, hunched over. Thank goodness she seems to be quite small. Um, and so Mabel is both an avid skater, an avid sort of kind of winter carnival enthusiast. She goes on to be a skating instructor at the West Side Rink. So along the Bear River, where they're on the trail where there used to be a baseball diamond and now it's just kind of grass, that was the West Side skating rink. She would come up with these pageants, and Bozo was so popular, and this whole performance was so popular, they'd go around the state. Their attendance was requested. And we even have some footage of it with Mabel in that dress. And this is all a performance. It is just something that feels so wonderfully unique. Um, and so they did that performance for years. I don't know if you saw it. It's something I just still can't figure out. As Mabel's riding the donkey, it's not like she's sitting over the hips of the guy in the back. He's like on her, the guy's leaning over, and she is on his back. And yeah, as well as capable. I mean, and they can ham it up for the performance. So, we had the city seeing the value in doing this. The roads are getting cleared by the state, investment in roads by the government. But then it's like, the real people. These are real. Kellogg goes on to have his art studio. Mabel, I can't remember what she does, but she remains a lifelong resident. And then also, we have her wedding dress at the museum too, of all things. Uh, Continues to teach kids ice skating, and so it's like the everyday Petoskey residents are what makes this amazing thing happen. So this is the Detroit Skaters, and this is such an interest. This is a small world story. So this is Marie Zarem. We have a number of pictures of her and her brothers, and I think her husband. They come a few times to the Winter Carnival, and we have letters to her, letters from her that she sent to Mabel, talking about events and pageants and things to do. It's fascinating. So we built this display, this exhibit in the museum, and a local Petoskey resident came through, and she looked at the picture as I happened to be there and said, "That's my mom." So that's how I figured out. And she said, "Well, if that's your mom," and then I went back because we had the barrel jumper picture on display too. I said, "Well, who's that?" And she's like, "That's my uncle." I was like, "Is he still alive or did he survive that?" She's like, "Yeah, he did it all the time." So that's how I knew that the barrel jumper made it. And it was just a really cool sort of small world thing. Here is Mabel Johansson, in contact with Marie, and then later on, her daughter being a resident here and being able to, see this, how wild to see that picture in your local history museum when you grew up in Detroit. So, um, and this is also later footage, and this is all on YouTube on the museum site. So this is the snow trains. This is from about 1940. So the carnival continues to remain popular. But the world's changing. So this gentleman here, who you're going to see in just a moment, looking a little too cool for school, that's Tom Harmon, Heisman Trophy winner, University of Michigan. Um, went on to be a sportscaster, and his son is Tom Harmon as well. Is that right? In CSI. So it's fantastic. We have here he is, um, and this is I just love that you can clearly tell that's the train station, the museum. Um, he writes a letter later on back to the committee saying, "Hey, this was such a fun time. Um, can you send me some pictures so I can send them to my mother?" So I thought that was nice. But as I said, income statements. Um, this is why some people are really good with photos, and things like that. Some people are good with structures, architecture, like historical architecture and things like that. I think I enjoy the most exciting part of history, which is receipts. Um, I mean, that's why, for one thing, writing was supposedly created, to maintain ledgers and things like that. And two, people are less likely to lie, though they still absolutely will. But one thing that we see here, so this is the 1941-42 Winter Carnival. And the accounts, so the accounts payable, 695, and the income was 524 for a deficit. This had been going on for a while. So what had started successfully and was also being funded by those New Deal programs. That's why that intersection, I think, is really important. Well, by this time, and also something else significant happened. The Winter Carnival isn't really keeping itself funded. There are notes from the meeting minutes that the Winter Ball, fewer people are buying the $1 tickets to dance, more of them are buying the 25-cent tickets to observe. There's fewer sponsorships and things like that. As we all know, being in these communities, getting funding is always really tough. Maintaining that funding is also really tough. And they're going through the same things that we do. But as well as past President George Porter says, here's wishing you the best of luck and success in another great winter carnival. If it wasn't for Mr. Hitler and a couple of other guys, I'd be there myself. Carnival is a great morale builder as well as a booster for Petoskey. Keep up the good work. Regards. So a lot's changing. There was no carnival in 1943, 44, and 45, both because war effort as well as one winter was also unseasonably warm. But so the Winter Carnival, I want to be clear, it's not like the end of the Winter Carnival. And there's a couple reasons why we always kind of focus on these earlier ones. One is it's kind of the peak of it. We don't get those ice thrones. I would love to see that again, but I can't see how that we would do that. But if anybody wants to donate $1 million to do so, like I'm down. Um, but the war effort changes things, and also it's the nature of the History Museum. We sometimes seem to think like history has to be something that happened way back when. Well, oops, sorry. History is something that is happening right now. Um, if you can help me out. Oh, thank you, Alyssa. Sorry. History is something that is happening right now, but there's a huge gap between when the History Museum will get its records versus when something might happen. So the History Museum was started in 1970 something. It's just celebrated its 50th anniversary. I should know that better. Um, but at that time, when the history got a lot of its archival material and continues to get more, but there was that big community push for it. Well, people provided what they thought was old. So it was a lot of things that was about 50 years older or 50 years older or older at the time. So 1920s or before. And it kind of has gotten less stuff. So there's not as many records about the 60s, 70s, certainly than the 80s and 90s and now. So I think getting ourselves to think as a community that, oh, it's worth holding on to these things and putting them into archives is very valuable. You don't have to wait a half century because then I won't get to study it. All right, thank you. Um, so that is one issue. The other issue is a lot of the GIs So a number of GIs during World War II learned how to ski with mountain divisions and things like that. They didn't know where they would be fighting, as well as a number of the U.S. occupational zone in Europe included portions of the Alps. And so if you have a bunch of young men who are thankfully no longer fighting, they might want to go try and do something silly, as we saw previously. So they were learning to ski, as well as changes in technology were creating things like chairlifts. So coming back to McManus's quote here, there's no reason why Petoskey and Little Traverse Bay region with its natural resources cannot lead in the winter sports activities. I'd argue he was correct. Now, this is Kayla Kuhn from Boyne City. She trained obviously out west, but places like the Boyne Resorts and Nubs Knob have given a number of kids and a number of us, whether we're able to be a stellar gold medalist performer or just be competent at getting down hills on a couple of slabs of plastic. It's an experience that not everybody else has. I remember in in college, I went skiing with I went to a local ski hill in downstate, thinking, all right, cool, I can do this. I'm not the greatest skier, I can do it, I'll be fine. I get there and it's a bump in the road. And I know we have hills, we don't have mountains, I get it. But we do have something rather special with that. So downhill skiing became more popular, so less of the skating. Boyne Resort starts in 1940, I think, opens in 1949. They're pretty quick the Kirches are pretty quick to add things like chairlifts so that you don't, it's a lot easier to get up that hill. Nubs opens in 1957, I think, and they are cornerstones to our winter resort economy, as well as just something for all of us to do. So I think why the Winter Carnival became, less of a peak moment is that we kind of had a Winter Carnival all winter long. And with advents of snowmaking machines and things like that, we're able to extend the seasons. So, um, one other thing I want to say too is, so I do think I will say the Winter Carnival, I think, is something that has continued into now. It's evolved. It really hasn't gone away. It just might not be here in a way that we can see it as we saw it in 1930s. But then there's a process of discovering all this stuff. And I used to kind of roll my eyes when my mother would make scrapbooks and things like that. And I'm so sorry. It is because of Mabel Johansson's scrapbook. So I have some of these pieces up here. It is because of Mabel Johansson's scrapbooks, committees holding on to their notes, holding on to receipts, newspaper clippings, all that kind of stuff. They were able to piece this together. And this wouldn't have been possible if people hadn't said, hey, I find this interesting. I'm going to save it. And maybe somebody else will too, and put it at a place that can maintain those. So I think it's really critical. If you want to know history, you have to preserve it. And preserving it is really hard. We actually cannot perfectly preserve anything. Everything is in a state of decay. And that's a really terrifying, I'm looking at all this paper, terrifying thing because it's like, yeah, the paper's just going to degrade. I mean, there's challenges in saving things even like the Magna Carta, Declaration of Independence and things like that. I mean, they're documents that will hold up well, but time takes its toll on everything. So the museum does, we can look at the exhibits, we can look at the pieces, which we have a few here, again, Bozo and Maple's dress. But that paper to me is one of the most critical things. And the museum, you should always be thinking, what do we have to save? How is we can support saving it? So consider, the fact that the museum is our community's archive. And that community archive needs constant investment and improvement. We could not have these stories along with thousands of others. I could not have gotten to know Mabel. I would not have had the chance to really understand what it meant when I met her daughter, um, if it hadn't been for having these. So please consider supporting the museum as well as other places. I know the Art Center as well has archives, and realizing that sometimes their dollars go into things you might not see, like acid-free boxes, acid-free folders, climate control, things that aren't maybe super exciting, but they allow the most essential things to be saved. So, sorry, I have to make the. I'm not sorry, actually. It's wonderful. Yes. Yes.
of land that has all kinds of antique postcards from the early 1900s going to the Bond family, the Petoskey, and maybe heirlooms Bond. Are there any Bond descendants around?
I don't know. The Genealogical Society, they're great friends of the museum too. They're generally some of the best people if you want to kind of try and find that. Yeah, there are. I mean, it is wild now going through postcard collections at local antique shops or even our own, starting to realize all those names. I mean, you start to make those connections really quickly, and you're like, oh yeah, like they were, over here and over there and doing this thing. And two, I will be honest, it is a little hard for the museum or any place to preserve everything. So sometimes you have to be judicious in what you take and what you don't.
It's a tough part that girls give up their big name kind of because there could be Bond descendants around here for a lovely very antique boys they found their big name. Sometimes it's important.
Yeah, I mean it's just the way of the world. I will say it's fascinating looking at the museum has a collection really cool. This is one of my favorite pieces from the women's suffrage movement. It starts off as this really interesting sort of informal survey of women in the area during World War I, because they were thought if we need workers and things like that. And then it turns into more of an organizing piece for the suffrage movement. But so many of these people in there are referenced as Mrs. Ben Johnson, and I can't figure out always who that is. So it's one of those things that you just have to figure out how to navigate to. Any other questions? Yes. Well, it certainly was little children. If you watch, so the video footage that I had in the video footage. So here's one thing. It's like, so I have Mabel's scrapbook as an example, and that's where we get a lot of photos. So she's taking pictures. She has pictures of herself. I mean, this is kind of the lenses that we have to realize we're looking for or looking through in history. So this stuff about kind of her and what she did. The Detroit skaters are really represented in her. So those are some of the images that we get. But the video footage that I showed, it's on YouTube for in Petoskey History Museum's account, and you'll see there are some young children in skating pageants as well. So certainly there was a lot of children-oriented things, but also the fact that the adults were seen as a way to compete and do they were quite serious about the activities as well. Yes. Yes, and I want to adjust it for inflation. Um, it was probably, and two, this is also a question of so the receipts, the city was supporting it, and that doesn't show up necessarily. So the city and the government were in some ways supporting some of the expenses, and that's not going to show up in the winter committee's expenses, but certainly. So in 1940, at about $700, assume that about times that by 25 is what their budget was for the Winter Carnival community or Winter Carnival Club. So seven. e- Exactly. So workers are paid through government. There's a lot of, I think, sort of goodwill activity because we can, again, as you go through the business notes, you can see who's just actually doing things for free. I mean, they give credit to them in the notes. So a lot of those costs get hidden. But it's one thing to adjust for inflation, but I will say I've spent on my mind too of like, what did this really cost? Because haven't quite figured that out. It's a good question though. Yes. Um, yeah, and it's I'm a rather yes. I have a bad feeling that some aspects of what we do is my fault. Yeah.
I just wondered if there's any talk of potentially moving it to earlier in the winter to be able to make that more marketable.
No, that I don't know as much about. I think, and two of the real drivers of all the winter activity now are going to be the ski resorts. I would have in the past said snowmobiling as well, but other than the last few years, I think snowmobiling clubs are really on the decline because exactly what you're talking about. Um, so as for moving the event itself, I don't really know. In some ways, it's kind of keeping with the spirit of the carnival. Um, and but I think it does point to some of the challenges that we will be seeing. The few times the Winter Carnival itself was not held due to, if you don't have snow or ice and I mean and all the skating that they're doing, I mean they don't have any refrigeration to freeze the ground like the hockey stadium that we have. So it was a real challenge for them at times, but it's clear it's a different type of challenge today. So I don't know if they'll move it, but Petoskey, I would argue, or this area will continue to see habits change as the weather continues to change. One of the best lessons I've ever learned in history is as climate changes, cultures change. It's not always pleasant. Yes.
On how people operate future because of the fact that we don't print out pictures anymore. All of our pictures are just stored on our phones or on the cloud.
I love that question. I think about it a lot. Because too, I think, oh man, like what are they gonna do? But wouldn't you just ask that question at any time? I mean, so one thing it is I don't have an idea, but my thought is like we'll have archaeological programmers who'll have to figure out how to put these silicone chips back together in some manner, way, shape, or form, and then extract data from it. I don't quite know what it will look like, but I don't doubt human ingenuity to do it. I mean, thinking of how when I was at U of M, and I didn't study really ancient history. That wasn't quite my thing. I find it interesting. But I was taking ancient Greek. Oh, I forgot about that. That was horrible. I thought this would be cool. I don't have to speak it. Oh no. All right, sorry. So the I made it by. They have a large papyri collection there. And so a student of all things had just happened to find like some box that they just didn't realize they even had. And this is a challenge in archives, like Library of Congress even. My partner at the museum, Jane, she would go volunteer in down at museums in the DC area for many years. And they have real challenges of managing archives and things like that. They're very good at it. It's just when you have millions and millions of records like they do, it's being perfect is tough. Um, and so they had all these little pieces of papyrus with little bits of writing on it that I think it ended up like it would get used as insulation, some form of insulation. This is what I think I remember. So some form of insulation in the homes. I think it was this was Egypt. Roman Egypt is where I think it came from. And then you just had to piece it together. So I think it would be and like I think wraps on mummies even sometimes will use those papyri pieces. And they have methods now of like basically because you'll have to say, hey, this mummy might not be as important. The wraps on the mummy. I'm not super clear on this. Might not be as important as the papyrus here. So they'll just kind of like dissolve it and take the pieces of papyrus and then start piecing it together. So I know that's not necessarily the technology you're talking about, but I think that is the challenge that every archaeologist and historian will face is piecing that kind of stuff together given whatever resources you have. So I've looked forward to it. I've sort of thought I shouldn't say this with a couple of museum board members here. I've thought about just like kind of putting little interesting things in the archive just to throw people off, just to have some fun. 100 years from now, I have not done it. But I've also sort of thought, that's the value of having sort of intentional Rosetta Stones. Making sure that I want in 1,000 years, I want somebody to come back and look at that and be like, what were they doing? I'm curious. And if we can help, I mean, this is just my personal thought, help them do that better, they'll I don't want to take the fun out of discovery for them, but it, could help them out a lot. One other quick thing is, I mean, it's why I think we have Beowulf, if I remember correctly, because tomes are so expensive that you would just kind of keep gluing pages over it. So we have Beowulf because they would peel, researchers would peel those pages back and see, well, what was underneath. So at some point, because too, you'll see with our scrapbooks, well, there's city ledgers that then people paste over. So there's information behind, like that somebody's like, this isn't important, that they then paste other information on top of. But I'm really curious, like, well, what's going on in the city ledger? So being able to, find those ways to peel back will always be the challenge. And I hope I didn't sidestep your question too much. Anything else? All right.